And just remember that shortcut, Command / on Mac and Control / on Windows. The comment is not an HTML element and is not rendered to the browser. So let's now apply what we've learned to our Quill project. Let's first do a documentation type of comment. Comments can be really useful in helping divide up different sections of our page. At the moment, it isn't so clear which section is which by just looking at the HTML. Let's go and add a comment here to make this clear that this section is the navigation. Again, I'm going to be typing Command / on my Mac. And I'm going to type this comment all in uppercase and write navigation. This section over here is called a hero section. So I'm going to write another comment here, Command / as hero section. All of this content is to do with the features of the Quill app. So let's go and write a comment here, features section. This Get Started Now is part of the call to action section at the bottom. So let's go and call this CTA section. And all this content made up our footer. So let's add a comment here, footer. Now, as you can see, adding these comments makes it a lot easier to immediately see which content belongs to each section. Later on in the HTML section of the course, we're going to be covering something called semantic HTML. This is HTML that will actually help distinguish these different sections, so commenting becomes less necessary, but for now it is very helpful. Let's go and add the other type of comment, which was a note to self. I'm just going to write one simple one down here to remind me to add in the social media icons. So I'll write add in social media icons later. As you can see, I write my different section comments all in uppercase, whereas notes to self tend to all be lowercase. This way I can clearly see the difference between the two. And my different section headings really pop out a lot more. And as we mentioned earlier, these comments do not appear in the browser. So let's have a look at that by looking at the page. So as you can see, there has been no changes to the HTML in the browser. The comments are not being shown. They're only shown inside VS Code for our own reference. Lastly, we'll get hands-on experience with inspecting HTML elements using Chrome DevTools. We'll discuss what are Chrome DevTools and how to use Chrome DevTools. So first up, what are Chrome DevTools? They're just a set of web development tools built into the Chrome browser that allows developers to inspect, debug, and profile web apps. You can think of DevTools like a builder's toolbox, which has tools like hammers, spanners, and screwdrivers for different purposes in building a house. Chrome DevTools has many sophisticated features. The common tools we'll be using in the Full Stack Bootcamp include allowing us to see a web page's underlying HTML and CSS, to view and interact with JavaScript, and information about network requests. So let's now take a look at Chrome DevTools. Alright, I'm on the home page of a web application called Asana. It's another project management tool, and we're going to be looking at example pages throughout the HTML section. To get into DevTools, I right-click on the page and click Inspect. This opens up this window on the right here inside the browser. Now, I personally don't like it here, so I'm going to change its orientation to the bottom of my screen. I do that by clicking these three dots and click this icon to move the dock to the bottom. I'm then going to scroll down a bit so we can see more of our page. Now, the way DevTools is structured is it has all these tabs along here. I'm currently in the Elements tab, and we'll be using the Elements tab a lot in the HTML and CSS section of the course. The Elements tab shows the underlying HTML markup. For example, I can click on this H1, and this is the H1 markup of what we see here, a smarter way to work. And I can click on any piece of HTML. Now, if there is a specific piece of HTML I would like to look at, instead of trying to find it in here, what I can do is click on this Inspect icon over here. And this allows me to go on the page and click on any element I'm interested in. For example, this heading. We can see that it's an H2. Let's go and look at some other elements we've looked at already. I'm going to scroll to the top and click on this navigation bar. And you'll see that this is a list item as part of an unordered list. The same structure we're using in our Quill project. This section on the right are CSS rules that are being applied. It's the styling. We'll be looking at this extensively in my CSS full course. If I move over to console, this is where JavaScript code is being executed. We'll be working a lot with the console in my JavaScript full course. Just for now, to give you a taster, I'm going to declare a variable of age, const age equals 50. I'm then going to multiply age by 3 to get 150. We've just executed some JavaScript code. Don't worry at all about any of the syntax I've used. I just want to show you that the console is where JavaScript code is run and executed. The Network tab is where we can see HTTP requests and responses. We'll actually be looking at this later in the HTML forms topic of this course, especially when sending requests from our front-end to our back-end server. Later on in the Full Stack Bootcamp, we will be looking at the Application tab when we start implementing user authentication and authorization. Anyway, don't let any of this overwhelm you for now. I just wanted to give a very high-level overview of web dev tools, and that we're going to be using them a lot throughout this course. We'll be starting nice and slow in the Elements tab to look at the underlying HTML of different web pages. Great work! We've now finished the HTML text section of the course. It's now time to learn about hyperlinks and attributes. We'll first take a deep dive into the concept of file paths, which is used throughout web development, and then we'll learn about HTML attributes so we can construct the all-important hyperlink, an HTML element that powers the World Wide Web. Let's begin by understanding how to reference and navigate files within your projects using file paths. We will be discussing text and graphical-based computers, directory structure, and absolute and relative file paths. We're going to take a step back from coding to look at the important concept of file paths, which is used throughout web development. And to understand file paths, the first thing we need to understand is how computers have developed. The way we interact with computers has changed a lot. Early computers were text-based computers and came onto the scene in the 1970s and 80s. You can see that this computer here only has a keyboard. Modern computers that you and I use are called graphical computers, where we interact with them with a keyboard and, more importantly, a mouse. We'll first talk about text-based computers, where users interacted with computers using text-based interfaces. The computer screen would look like this, where at the bottom there is something called a command line. This is where users type various instructions to communicate with the computer. These commands would range from simple tasks like opening files or folders to more complex operations like running software or programming scripts. In my Full Stack Bootcamp, we will work with the terminal on your computer, which is a text-based interface, which is a key tool for back-end development. Text-based computers work very differently to graphical computers. Personal computers have a graphical user interface, which allows users to visually interact with graphical elements. For example, there are visual elements like icons and windows, which users can click on and interact with in order to open up different files and folders. Next up, we need to discuss the concept of directory structure. A directory structure is a hierarchy structure that organizes and stores files and directories. Directories is just a fancy word for folders. I'm going to step through the file path of where the Quill index.html file is stored on my computer. I'm on a Mac, so the starting point for where all files are saved is the hard drive, called Macintosh HD. This is commonly called the root directory because it is where all other files and directories are stored. The next level is the users directory, which stores files and folders of different users of the MacBook. Next is the actual user, which in my case is my full name, Daniel Brand. Next are the directories you'd be used to seeing, like the desktop folder. On my desktop, I have a folder called Quill. And inside Quill is the index.html file we've been working on. On a text-based computer, in order to navigate to the index.html file and open it, we'd have to type in the command line which we saw earlier, and would look something like this. We'd start at Macintosh HD, and then to move to the next directory, we type a / and the next directory name, so / users, then / Daniel Brand, then / desktop, then / Quill, and then /index.html. But let's go through the same journey we went through before, just doing it graphically now. On my Mac, I'm going to go to the top navigation bar for the Finder window, click on Go, and click on Computer, which will take me to the root Macintosh HD directory. So let's go through this file path visually. I'm going to click on Users, then Daniel Brand, then Desktop, then Quill, and here's my index.html file. So that is how we do the same thing visually. Now we can actually see a representation of the text-based file path. On the Finder navigation bar, if I click View and Show Path Bar, now down here you can see this file path very similar to how it would appear on a text-based interface, where instead of /, we have this angled bracket. Okay, so finally moving on to material relevant for web development. We'll now be discussing absolute file paths and relative file paths. Starting off with absolute file paths. An absolute file path provides the location of a file or directory starting at the root directory. We've seen this already, where the root is Macintosh HD, and the file path to get to index.html from the root would look like this. Absolute file paths always start from the root directory, so you can imagine for very nested directory structures, this can get very long. Now, absolute file paths are most useful when navigating on a computer. You can actually see the file path for our Quill HTML document inside the address bar up here. More commonly used in web development are relative file paths. A relative file path provides the location of a file or directory in relation to your current working directory. Okay, so new word here, current working directory. What is that? In our case, the main Quill folder is our current working directory. It is the top level folder where all our other files and folders are going to be located. The index.html file that we've been working on lives inside the Quill folder. And in the next chapter, I'll also add a new user account registration page that will also live inside this Quill directory, called registered.html. Inside the Quill directory, I'm going to add another directory called images. This is where a few images are going to live, like a logo image and an icon image. Working with a relative file path to our current directory is most useful in web development, as we often want to get the location of a file relative to where we are working. This idea will become very clear in the hyperlinks chapter, where we will make a register button on the homepage, and we will need to be able to reference the register.html file. So let's compare relative and absolute file paths to make this concept crystal clear. Now, when referencing any files or folders directly inside the Quill working directory, we can just reference it like this, index.html. The equivalent absolute file path would look like this. Now for the register page, because it is directly inside the Quill folder, the relative file path can be referenced like this, register.html. And the equivalent absolute file path would look like this. Now the images directory is a folder that is directly inside the Quill folder, so we can also refer it as just images. No different to how we reference indexed or register, except there's no file extension like .html because images is just a folder. The absolute file path would look like this. Now for the logo.png file, that is inside an images folder, which is inside the Quill folder. So the relative file path would be images/logo.png. And the absolute file path would look like this. Similarly, the icon.png is also inside the images folder, which is inside the Quill folder. So the relative file path would be images/icon.png. And the absolute file path would look like this. In addition to being a lot more concise and easy to work with, relative file paths have another advantage, which is relative file paths remain intact even if you move the location of your current working directory. Let's say, for example, I move the Quill folder from my desktop to my documents folder. The relative file paths still work, as all references are based on the current working directory. This is not true for the absolute file paths. They still reference desktop, So these files will not be accessible as the Quill folder has moved into Documents. So let's summarize this chapter and start to build out the summary card for this topic. File paths, hyperlinks, and attributes. In this chapter, we looked at file paths. We had a directory structure that looked like this, where the start was Macintosh HD, which was also called the root, and the Quill folder was the current working directory, where all our files and folders for the Quill project are located. We compared relative and absolute file paths on two different levels. Directly inside the Quill directory, the relative file path of the index.html file is just referenced as index.html, whereas the absolute file path looks like this. Now the logo.png file is inside the images folder, which is inside the Quill folder. So the relative file path is images/logo.png, and the absolute file path would look like this. So let's set up the overall structure of the Quill project. We've already got our index.html file, and we'll now add a register.html file, which will be used for the registration page, and an empty images directory, where later we'll store images used in the project. First up, I'm just going to delete these files. We don't need them anymore. Inside the Quill folder, I'm going to go and add a new folder called Images. Let's now open up the Quill working directory inside Visual Code. An easy way to do this is just to simply drag the folder in, like this. If I click on this Documents icon over here, you'll see that here's my working directory, with the empty images folder and index.html. I'm now going to create the register.html file by right-clicking inside the Quill working directory. I click New File and call it register.html. By adding the HTML file extension, VS Code knows that I'm working with an HTML file. Let's get our boilerplate by clicking !Enter. I'm just going to update the title to Register, and let's just give this an H1 of Register. So you can see now inside the Quill folder, we have an index.html file, register.html file, and an images folder that we'll later be putting images into. And as I said before, as we move through this HTML section of the course, you'll see why the concept of relative file paths is so important. Next up, we'll learn how to connect different web pages and resources using hyperlinks and attributes. We'll be talking about hyperlinks and anchor tags, HTML attributes, absolute and relative URLs, and hyperlinks in lists. So what are hyperlinks? A hyperlink is a piece of clickable text, image, or element that navigates users to another web page. Looking back at the Monday.com homepage, there is a Get Started button over here, which is a hyperlink that would take users to the registration page to create a new account. Another common location of hyperlinks is in the navigation bar, where text like pricing, contact sales, login, and get started are all hyperlinks that would navigate users to other pages on the web application. Now, an important distinction we need to make is between internal and external hyperlinks. These links in the footer of Monday.com are examples of internal hyperlinks, just like the ones we saw before. Each of these links would navigate users to other web pages on the Monday.com domain. In contrast, external links navigate users to other domains, like these social links, which are external hyperlinks. Clicking on one of them, like the Facebook icon, would navigate you to the Monday.com Facebook page, which is an external site as the web page is on Facebook.com and not Monday.com. We'll now be taking a look at the anchor tag, which is how we create hyperlinks in HTML. They're called anchor tags as it is a metaphor to indicate that these tags create a stable, fixed link or reference point, much like how an anchor holds a ship in place. The anchor element is made up of an anchor opening tag, an anchor closing tag, and anchor text. This is the text that is clickable and would navigate me to the Facebook page if I were to click on it. But how exactly does the anchor tag know where to send me? To understand that, we need to introduce a very important concept called HTML attributes. We briefly touched on this in the HTML document structure video, where the boilerplate HTML code uses attributes. Here is an example of an HTML attribute. href equals facebook.com/quillapp. The HTML attribute lives inside the opening tag, and HTML attributes provide additional information about an HTML element. The attribute is made up of an attribute name, as well as an attribute value, which for the case of a URL is wrapped in quotation marks, and you can either use single or double quotes. For creating hyperlinks, the HTML attribute we use is href, which stands for hypertext reference, and specifies the URL that the anchor text will navigate users to when they click it. In this case, clicking on Facebook page will navigate users to the Facebook page of our Quill application. The href is just one of many important attributes we will come across in this course. For now, just have a good understanding of what an attribute is and that the href attribute is always used in anchor tags to specify the destination URL. Now, in the previous chapter, we spent a good chunk of time discussing absolute and relative file paths, and this will now finally come in handy to understand absolute and relative URLs. Typically, external hyperlinks have an href attribute specifying the full destination domain, complete with elements like HTTPS. This is known as an absolute URL. An absolute URL is kind of similar to an absolute file path, where the URL provides a direct and complete path to a specific resource or web page on the internet. Similar to how an absolute file path specifies the location of a folder or file in relation to the root folder. Absolute URLs are used for external links like social media pages. In contrast, internal hyperlinks have an href attribute specifying a file relative to the current working directory. This is known as a relative URL. A relative URL is very similar to a relative file path, as they are both a way to reference a resource based on the current location. Relative URLs are used to link different pages within the same web application, like a link from the register button on the homepage to the user registration page. Let's go and code up some internal and external hyperlinks in VS Code. To demonstrate this, I'm going to be making a very basic clone of Wikipedia. I'm first going to make a new folder on my desktop called Wikipedia. I'll then open up this empty folder in VS Code. I'll click Open, go to my desktop, and open Wikipedia. The first Wikipedia page is going to be about myself. I'll click New File, and call this danielbrand.html. As always, I'll type !enter to get the boilerplate code, and I'll hit Save. The title of this HTML document will just be Daniel Brand. Inside the body, I'm going to first add an H1 and put my name, as this is what the article is about. Wikipedia articles always have some introductory text, so I'm going to put a paragraph here and put some introductory text about myself, which I just got ChatGPT to create, and does a fantastic job of making me seem a lot more impressive than I actually am. Next up, I'm going to add a section about my early life. I'll create the heading using an H2 and use a paragraph element for the text, which again, I got ChatGPT to write. Now, ordinarily, you would have more sections, so I would see more H2s and paragraphs, but to avoid making this video boring, I'm going to jump straight to the references, which is usually found at the bottom of the page. And again, I'll use an H2 and type references. Now, the references in a Wikipedia article are usually external hyperlinks. They're there to validate things that come up in the article, so that as readers of the article, we know that what it is talking about is authentic. I'm going to put two references to things that I discuss in my article. The first is over here, where it says he has been featured in several mainstream publications such as the Sydney Morning Herald. I'm just going to put a 1 in square brackets after this. The second reference I'm going to put is to this sentence here. His local team came second in the state of the New South Wales Champions of Champions competition in 2002. I'm going to put in square brackets a number 2 after this. So now let's go and add the hyperlinks. To do this, we need to get our anchor tags. And in VS Code, all we do is type the letter A and hit enter, and we get our set of anchor tags. And very nicely, we also have the href attribute automatically there for us. This first reference was for the Sydney Morning Herald article I appeared in. So I'm just going to type Sydney Morning Herald. And I'm going to copy and paste in the external hyperlink I have in my clipboard. I'm going to add a second set of anchor tags by typing A again and hitting enter. This time, I'm going to be referencing the Champions of Champions football competition. And again, I'm going to paste in the external hyperlink I have sitting in my clipboard. Let's give this a save and check it out in the browser. So here you can see this Wikipedia page I've made about myself. If I scroll down to the references, you'll see that if I click these, I'll be navigated to those pages. This is the article about my first venture, Spoonfeed Me, where I appear along other students creating startups at a young age. Now, full disclosure, this title is The Uni Students Making a Fortune. I'm not making a fortune, I still rent an apartment. And we can do the same thing with the second hyperlink. We'll click that to be taken to the external page, which in this case is a PDF sitting online. So let's now go and add some internal hyperlinks. We're going to be doing the same thing that Wikipedia do, where different keywords inside paragraphs will link you to other sections of Wikipedia to explain what they are. I'm going to make a page about St. Ives, which is the suburb I grew up in, and a page about the sport wakeboarding. So inside our Wikipedia folder, inside VS Code, I'm going to click right-click, New File. I'll call the first St-Ives.html, and I'll call the second file wakeboarding.html. In each of these, I'm just going to put a simple H1. I'll first get our boilerplate code. I'll update the title to St. Ives, and I'm just going to put a heading of St. Ives. For wakeboarding, I'm going to do the same. Grab our boilerplate code, give a title of wakeboarding, and give an H1 in the body of wakeboarding. So let's now go and link both of these pages to the Daniel brand page. Inside the paragraph, I'm going to go grab a set of anchor tags by hitting enter. The clickable text I want is St. Ives, so I'm going to copy that, remove it, and paste it in here. And this now becomes the hyperlink text, so it's clickable. Now, because the stives.html file is inside our current working directory, the Wikipedia folder, we just reference it like this, St-Ives, and you can see that VS Code automatically finds the file for us, so I can just hit enter. And just as a reminder, this is the relative file path. Let's go do the same for wakeboarding. I'm going to go grab a set of anchor tags by hitting enter. I'll cut the wakeboarding text and place it inside the anchor tags. And then for the reference, again, it's the relative file path from our current working directory, which is just wakeboarding.html, which VS Code automatically finds for us. Now, just to drive home this point of relative URLs, I'm going to go make another HTML file inside a folder inside the Wikipedia folder. I'm going to right-click and create new folder here, and let's call this one University. The University folder could have a bunch of HTML files about different university courses. On the folder, I'm going to click right-click New File and make a new HTML file called engineering.html. Inside here, I'm just going to get some new boilerplate. I'm going to give it a title Engineering and an H1 tag of Engineering. Now back on the Daniel brand page, let's go and link to this new engineering page. Like before, I'm going to get a set of anchor tags by hitting enter. I'm going to cut this text and place it inside the anchor tag so it's clickable. And now for the relative URL. This is inside the University folder. So I first type University, and you can see VS Code automatically finds that University folder. So I'm just going to click it. And VS Code can also see that I have an engineering.html file there. So I can either click this or start typing and click it. I just wanted to add this so I can show you an example of referencing another HTML page inside another folder. So let's go and check this out now in the browser. So here you can see these internal hyperlinks appearing in blue. And if I click it, I'm navigated to that HTML page we made, engineering. If I click St. Ives, we're taken to the St. Ives page. Now if I click wakeboarding, we're taken to the wakeboarding page. You'll also notice that the file path is up here, where for the engineering.html file, we place that inside another university folder. whereas St. Ives was just directly inside the Wikipedia current working directory. Now, if you want to have a bit of a laugh, you can have a read of these two stories that happened to me in my teenage years. The last concept we need to cover before moving on and continuing adding to our Quill app is hyperlinks in lists. A common pattern you will see is having hyperlinks inside list items. It's because often a list will be used to structure navigations, like a main navigation bar at the top of a web page or a footer of a page. I found this nesting a bit confusing when I first started out, so I wanted to go through it step by step. It works like this. We have our standard unordered list, say a navigation bar, that will have login and register list items. The login text now becomes hyperlink text inside the list item by wrapping it in an anchor tag. As you can see, we also have inside our opening anchor tag the href attribute, which is referencing the login page and is a relative URL. And it's the same for the register text. It now becomes hyperlink text inside anchor tags, which is inside the list item, and is also the href attribute pointing to the register page. So we can see we now have an anchor element wrapped inside list tags. Again, this pattern is very common, as we often want to provide clear structure for a set of hyperlinks. So nesting them inside an ordered or unordered list is a good way to achieve this, instead of having hyperlinks just one below another. Let's use this technique and go tidy up our Wikipedia page. At the moment, I just have these two references at the bottom kind of floating. I'm going to add some structure by adding them inside an ordered list. The reason I'm using an ordered list is so that I can get the numbers 1, 2, 3, etc., which will then match the numbers I'm using as reference points inside the paragraph text. For example, like this number 1 here. So let's go and add our ordered list. I type OL and hit enter to get our ordered list tags. And then we're going to have two list items. So I'm going to type li times 2. Now all we have to do is copy and paste each hyperlink into the list item. Let me zoom out a bit. So now you can see we have an anchor element or hyperlink, which is nested inside the list items. Let's go view this in the browser. So now you can see these hyperlinks under references are put inside an ordered list. And because I put 1 and 2 over here, they nicely match those references. To finish off, let's add to our summary card anchor tags and attributes. We saw that an attribute is an additional piece of information inside an HTML opening tag. An attribute is made up of an attribute name and an attribute value. And we saw we always needed to use the href attribute inside anchor tags to specify the destination of the hyperlink text. We also looked at absolute and relative URLs. Typically, external hyperlinks like social media pages will contain absolute URLs. And internal hyperlinks to other pages in the same domain, like the register page from the home page, will contain relative URLs, as it's all inside the current working directory. So let's now apply what we've learned to our Quill project. The login and register in the navigation bar are going to be hyperlinks. The Get Started and Learn More in this Hero section are also going to be hyperlinks. The Quill image in the top left corner of the navigation bar is also going to be a hyperlink, but we'll do that later when we add the image. I'm sure you're used to other web pages where clicking the icon in the top left always takes you back to the home page. We'll do the same here. In the Call to Action section, the Get Started button is a hyperlink. These social media icons down here will also be hyperlinked, but we'll be handling those later when we look at SVGs. And this menu navigation panel at the bottom with Home, Login, and Register will also be hyperlinks. And again, the small Quill logo over here will also be a hyperlink back to the home page. So let's now jump into VS Code and add in the hyperlinks we can do. I'm first going to go add a new HTML page called login.html. I'll grab our boilerplate, give it the title login, and give it an h1 login. Back to index.html, you'll see straight away we're going to be doing what we spoke about earlier, adding in hyperlinks inside list items. I'm going to cut this login text, and I'm going to type A to get a set of anchor tags. I'm going to paste in the login text over here. This will now make it clickable. For the href, I'm going to be referencing the login page. As it is directly inside our working directory, I can just type login and you'll see it appear. And I'll just hit enter to grab it. I'm going to do the same for the register. Cut the text, add in anchor tags, paste in the register text inside the anchor tags, and reference the register page. Again, this is also directly inside the Quill working directory, so all I type is register. Eventually we're going to be adding in the Quill image, which we said was also going to be hyperlinked. So for now, I'm just going to pop a comment, which on my Mac is Command/, on a Windows Control/. And I'm just going to write add in Quill logo with hyperlink later. In the hero section, for now I can only add in a hyperlink to get started, which is going to link to the register page. The functionality of Learn More is that it will scroll down to the feature sections, but we need to cover the material in the next chapter to be able to do that. So let's cut the Get Started text, grab our anchor tags, paste in the text here, and link to the register page. Now scrolling down to the call to action section, we need to add some hyperlink text saying Get Started. This is not inside a list because there's just one of them. So I'm just going to have a free-floating anchor tag. I'm going to have the text Get Started, and I'm going to link to the register page. Okay, so moving down to our footer. The first thing I'm going to do is pop a comment here to remind me to add in the Quill logo and hyperlink. Now looking at the social media icons. We'll be adding in the actual icons later in the SVG chapter, but for now let's go and put in the hyperlinks. I don't actually have social accounts for the Quill app, so I'm just going to link to the homepage of each social media. Now, these are external hyperlinks, so we're going to be grabbing absolute URLs. Like before, I'm going to cut this text, add in our anchor tags, paste the text between the anchor tags, and I'm just going to paste in the Instagram homepage from my clipboard. It's the exact same process for the others, so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Great, so I've now added in all those absolute URLs and made each social media text clickable. Let's now finish up by doing this small navigation menu at the bottom of the footer. The work to do on the login and register is the same we've seen before for the other internal URLs. We're going to cut this, add in anchor tags, paste in the text, and reference the login page. Same thing over here. Cut text, add in anchor tags, paste in register text, and reference the register page. So now let's do the home hyperlink. I'm going to cut home, add in some anchor tags, and paste home back in for the anchor text. But now what URL should we reference for the href attribute? Well, we're on the home page, which is index.html. So all we're going to do is put index.html here. We're basically referencing itself. Now later on in the bootcamp, we are going to see a better practice for this, but unfortunately it's not going to work for this page we're making now. So just know there is a better practice, but this will work totally fine. Let's now take a look at this in the browser. So you can see that all our hyperlinks appear as blue with an underline. And if I hover over them, you can see in the bottom left of the browser, it's showing the file path. So let's go ahead and click on some of these. I'm going to click on login first, and I'm taken to the login page. I'm then going to click on register, and I'm taken to the register page. You'll notice that as I'm clicking on these and returning, the hyperlinks are turning purple, which indicates that these have been visited. We'll be talking about this a lot more in my CSS full course. Now let's visit some of those external hyperlinks. If I click on Instagram, I'm taken to the Instagram homepage. Now when I click on home, I'm taken back to the original page. So all you're going to see is me move to the top of the page, like this. But I have been navigated back to index.html. Finally, we'll explore how to uniquely identify and style HTML elements with the help of the ID attribute. We'll be talking about what is the ID attribute and the concept of anchor linking. So what is the ID attribute? The ID attribute provides a unique identifier for an element. Not only is it used in HTML, but it's widely used in CSS and JavaScript as well. In HTML, it helps us link to a specific section of a web page. There are also other uses for the ID attribute, which we'll explore later on in this topic. In CSS, it helps us target and style a specific element. And in JavaScript, it helps us manipulate or get data from a specific element. Don't worry right now exactly what these mean for CSS and JavaScript. I just wanted to show you that the ID attribute is useful beyond just HTML. Let's take a look at the ID attribute in action by looking at our navigation list in the Quill app. We can give the unordered list tag an ID of navigation. The syntax is like any other attribute. It has a name, in this case ID, and a value, in this case navigation. Let's also add an ID attribute to the login hyperlink with an ID of login link, and an ID to our register hyperlink with a value of register link. As you can see, the ID attribute can be added to any HTML element. Let's also give our h1 an ID of main title. It's important to note that an ID value can only be used once. It means for another element like another heading, we could not reuse this value of main title, but another ID value like how it works. Now in practice, we don't go and add the ID attribute to all our HTML elements for the fun of it. We do it for a specific purpose like anchor linking. Anchor linking is where hyperlinks can directly link to elements with an ID attribute present. Let me show you an example of anchor linking on one of the education companies I run. It's called SnapRevise, and part of the product is we offer these once-a-year seminars. I'm currently on the seminar landing page, and if I scroll down, you can see there are a bunch of details about the event. Going back to the top of the page now, if I click this Book Now button, it takes me to the bottom of the page, where during February and March, you would see over here the different seminars that are on and their date and timings. So this is an example of anchor linking. We've clicked a hyperlink and been transported to another section of the page. So let's now see how this works in HTML. The first thing we would do is give an ID attribute to the heading we want to go to. In the example we just looked at, the heading was Scheduled Seminars, where below the heading you would see all the different seminars that are on. I've given this heading an ID of seminars. On the Book Now button, which is an anchor tag, we would then put an href attribute, where the value references this ID with a hashtag, and then the ID value, seminars. By doing this, the user is navigated to the heading when clicked. Let's now finish off the file paths, hyperlinks, and attribute summary card. We looked at the ID attribute and focused on the concept of anchor linking. We achieved this by giving an ID attribute to an HTML element. We then reference this element inside our hyperlink by using a hashtag and the ID value inside the href attribute. So let's now apply what we've learned to our Quill project. The Learn More hyperlink here will link to the features section below. So inside VS Code, I'm first going to go put an ID attribute inside this h2. To do this, I just type ID and hit enter. We'll give this the value of features. I'll then come to this Learn More button and turn this into a hyperlink. I'm going to cut Learn More. I'm going to get a set of anchor tags by typing enter. I'm going to paste in the hyperlink text. And I'm going to reference this ID by putting a hashtag and then features. Let's now take a look at this in the browser. So let's go ahead and click our Learn More button. You'll see that the page is moved down slightly, but you can't really see the effect. So instead, what I'm going to do is zoom in a lot on the page. Now, if I click Learn More, you'll see this a bit more pronounced, where the heading jumps to the top of the page. To really show this effect, I'm going to go add in some dummy paragraph text between the Learn More and this heading, so you can get a better sense of how it'll work. In VS Code, I'm going to put a paragraph, and I could just go do something like lorem times 10. But I'm a big sucker for hipster ipsum, as I like having a chuckle when I code, and it just provides a little bit of extra character to our mockups. Let's go and get 10 paragraphs and click Beer Me. Some of these words are just great, like waistcoat, meditation, and dream catcher. I'm going to copy this text to my clipboard and paste it in the paragraph tag. Refreshing our browser, you'll now see all this dummy text below the Learn More button. When I click it, you'll see that I'm navigated down to this heading, And this should give you a better indication of what it will feel like on the completed web application, where we'll jump down to a new section. And now, before we finish up, I'm just going to get rid of this paragraph. We're making excellent progress, and we've now completed the hyperlinks and attributes topic. Next up, we'll learn about self-closing tags and images. We'll first take a look at how self-closing tags differ from regular HTML tags, and we'll then learn how to include images in our HTML files, and spend a bit of time understanding the different kinds of images we can use in our HTML. Let's start by learning about special types of HTML elements known as self-closing tags. We'll be discussing what are self-closing tags and the HR and BR tags. So, what are self-closing tags? To answer that, let's quickly recap what the regular tag is, the tag we've been working with so far. The regular HTML tag requires an opening and closing tag to wrap the content. For example, the paragraph element is composed of a paragraph opening tag, a paragraph closing tag, and the paragraph content itself. So regular tags have both an opening and closing tag that are wrapping content, like headings, paragraphs, and lists that we've seen before. There is another type of HTML tag called a self-closing tag, otherwise known as a void element. For self-closing tags, the tag itself is the element with no content to wrap. We've already seen an example of a self-closing tag. So I'm inside a new HTML file. One of the first things we always do is grab our boilerplate code by hitting !enter. And part of this boilerplate code includes these meta tags. Now, back in the document structure video, we briefly spoke about meta tags. The tags are not wrapping any content. The attributes inside the meta tags contain this information for the browser. As the meta tags are not wrapping any content, they're self-closing. So we can see that a self-closing tag looks like this. Now there is another syntax for self-closing tags that looks like this, where there is a space at the end of the tag name and a /. Both syntaxes are valid. However, it is more common to use the first option as it is cleaner, but I did want to show you both because you may see the other version in other places. So let's now take a look at the full list of self-closing tags. The good news is that there are not that many, and only a few are used regularly, like the img tag, which stands for image, and is used to place images in our HTML, and the input tag, which is used on forms. We'll be discussing each of these in greater detail later on. Two simple self-closing tags we can look at now are the HR and BR tags. HR stands for horizontal rule. It creates a visible line between content. The tag can be either one of these, containing HR. The BR tag stands for line break. It creates a line break between content. The tag can be either one of these, containing BR. Let's go and use both of these tags inside VS Code. I'm going to create a new file by clicking New File. I'm going to select Text File. I'm going to select a language, search for HTML, and hit Enter. As always, I'm going to grab our boilerplate HTML by hitting !Enter. I'm straight away going to save this file by hitting Command S on my Mac, going to my desktop, and let's call it self-closing.html. I'm going to build a very simple page containing contact information. I'm going to make it for Jon Snow, one of my favorite characters from Game of Thrones. Let's call the document Jon Snow contact information. I'm going to go down to the body. Inside the body, I'm going to add an H1 and put his name, Jon Snow. I'm then going to put his address in paragraph tags. So I'll grab the paragraph tags by hitting P and Enter. Jon's address is Castle Black, the Wall, the North, Westeros. I'm then going to add a short description of him below. I'm going to grab paragraph tags again and paste from my clipboard the short description I have. Let's take a quick look at this in our browser. So there are two improvements I want to make to this. The first is that I want each portion of the address to appear on separate lines, instead of being in one sentence like this, comma separated. The second improvement is that I want a visual divider between this part of his name and address and his profile information. Let's do the visual divider first. I'm going to add the horizontal rule. So all I do is type HR and hit enter. I'm going to save that, and let's refresh the browser to see what we get. You can see we get a nice horizontal rule separating his name and address from his profile information. Let's now go sort out the address. I'm going to delete the comma, hit space, and type BR and hit enter. The reason I hit space was because if I didn't do that, VS Code would think I'm just typing BR after black and not looking for a tag. Now, you can leave the BR tag like this, or you can remove the spaces between the text. I personally like leaving space as it is more readable for me. I'm now going to do the same thing for the other commas. Remove comma, type BR, hit enter. And for this final comma here, I'm going to remove it, hit space, type BR, and hit enter. Let's refresh the browser and see what this looks like. You can see this address is a bit more readable, and it appears more like how it would on a letter. Now, a question you may have is, why can't I just use separate paragraph tags? So for example, why can't I just do a paragraph for Castle Black, a paragraph for The Wall, a paragraph for The North, and a paragraph for Westeros? I'm going to refresh the browser to see what this looks like. So the first thing you notice is that there's spacing between each line. Now this is not the main reason you wouldn't do this. This is easily fixed in CSS. The main reason you wouldn't do this is because this is like a contained unit. It's a paragraph of text that contains an address. It doesn't make sense to split up the paragraph into different paragraph tags. From an HTML perspective, it makes a lot more sense to keep it as one paragraph and then use the BR tag to visually break it up. So as a general rule of thumb, when you have a block of text and wanting part of that text to appear on separate lines in your browser, it's best practice to use a BR tag instead of separating it out by elements. Now in practice, the horizontal rule is not really used on modern web pages. I've come to this nice looking website here. I'm going to scroll down to the footer, and you'll see at the bottom this very faint grey line here, and this very faint grey line here. Now at this stage of the game, you would think that is a horizontal rule, so we'd expect to see a horizontal rule there. I'm going to go into the DevTools and take a look at this. As you know, we go right-click, Inspect. I click on this icon to select the element, and you'll see in the HTML there is no horizontal rule tag here. In modern web design, the approach is to use CSS instead, where we add a border to this element, something we will look at in my CSS full course. For now, I just want you to appreciate the horizontal rule tag is not actually used that much in practice. When I was making this video, I spent a lot of time looking at modern web pages and just couldn't find it. The only place I could find it was on the OG Berkshire Hathaway HTML-only website. If I inspect these grey lines here, you'll see we have our horizontal rule. Now, while horizontal rules are not that commonly used, line breaks still are. So let's summarize this chapter and start to build out the summary card for this topic. Self-closing tags and images. We looked at self-closing tags, where the tag itself is the element with no content to wrap. We saw that there were two syntaxes for self-closing tags, like this or like this, where the first one without a space or slash is more commonly used. So let's now apply what we've learned to our Quill project. We saw in the previous chapter that horizontal rules are not commonly used, but line breaks still are. I'm going to add a line break here. I'm doing this because I specifically want the first line of our heading to always read Mindful Living for the, and the second line to read Digital World. Using a line break will ensure this heading always divides like this visually. So let's go and add this to our project. Inside my H1 heading, I'm going to go over here and type BR to get my break tag. And as I said, I like to leave space between the BR tag and the text either side. Let's see how this looks in the browser. So you can see the effect here. The line break tag has pushed Digital World onto a second line, so that we have Mindful Living for the on the first line of the heading, and Digital World on the second line of the heading. And again, remember, we don't want to use two H1s to achieve this. Because this is one sentence, we want to use a line break to visually push this onto two lines. Next, we'll explore how to enhance web pages by embedding visuals using images. We'll be discussing how images are used in web design, the image tag, and absolute and relative URLs. So let's take a look at images in the context of HTML. Images add visual identity essential for branding and can aid in illustrating concepts easily. This is a web application called Notion. It's one of my favorite productivity tools, and their design style has become somewhat legendary in the design community. On the homepage, we can see here a simple black and white line illustration featuring stylized characters. It's a branding element. Images are also used for product illustrations, like over here. The purpose of them is to give a glimpse of how the product looks and feels, and to give users an indication of how it works. And here again on the side, we can see this stylized character, which is a branding element. It's also very common to use real-life imagery that is relatable. This kind of imagery improves our personal engagement and evokes our emotions. This section of the homepage is about the Notion community, which evokes a sense of belonging. So over here, it is fitting to have real-life imagery of their community meetup in Tokyo. We can also see real-life imagery used for testimonials, which makes sense because it adds confidence to see real images of people advocating the product. So let's now take a look at the image tag in HTML. The image tag, or IMG tag, is one of the most common self-closing tags we will be using throughout the course. The image tag has two important attributes. The first is the source attribute. This is a URL which points to the actual image file. In this case, a picture of a dolphin that's posted online. The second attribute is the alternative text attribute. This is a text description of the image and is used by browsers for two main purposes. The first is for screen readers, which is assistive software that translates on-screen information into speech, enabling visually impaired users to interact with computers. The second is for SEO, search engine optimization. The alt text allows search engines like Google to properly index images. So when you go on Google Images and search for a blue dolphin, Google knows that this is an image of a blue dolphin because of the alt text I'm providing. So let's now go add an image in VS Code. I'm going to make a new HTML file by clicking New File, selecting Text File, then clicking Select a Language and search for HTML. I'll straight away get our boilerplate by hitting !Enter, and I'll save this file by hitting Command S on my Mac, going to the desktop, and saving it as images.html. I'll update the title as well to images. Now, a popular tool that I often use to grab stock images is Unsplash, as the images look very professional. I'm going to go grab an image of a dolphin by just searching dolphin in the address bar. Let's find a suitable image. I like this one over here. So I'm going to click it, and then right-click on the image and go copy image address. I'm going to head back to VS Code, and inside the body tag, I'm going to type IMG to get our image tag. For the source attribute, I'm just going to paste the URL I just copied from Unsplash. Now, just to clean up this URL, there's a whole bunch of stuff here which is auto-formatting things. So I'm just going to remove it after the question mark. Now, at this stage, I wouldn't expect you to know that, so don't worry too much about it. Most images from the internet you'd be grabbing wouldn't have that. For the alt text, I'm going to give this a description of a pod of dolphins swimming. Let's take a look at this in the browser. So here is our image, and it appears massive because HTML is just displaying the source image file, which in this case is a fairly large image. I'm just going to zoom out on the browser. and you can see the image inside our HTML document. We're going to now revisit the concept of absolute and relative URLs. We saw this already in the hyperlink chapter, and they're also relevant to images. An image source can be referenced in two ways. The first is with an absolute URL. This is often used when an image is externally hosted, like we've already done with the Unsplash image. The second way an image can be referenced is using a relative URL. This is where the image is located somewhere inside our current working directory, and we are referencing the image file. So let's see how this works inside VS Code. So first up, I'm going to go grab another dolphin image. I like this one over here. So I'm just going to click over here, download free, and it's automatically going to go into my downloads folder. I'm just going to rename it dolphin.jpg. And I'm going to drag it over here onto my desktop. Now, oftentimes, when referencing images using a relative URL, you'll have multiple images, and they'll all be stored in a folder. So I'm going to create a new folder called images, and I'm going to move the dolphin image inside there. Now, our images file and our images folder are both on the desktop. So the desktop is the current working directory. So let's go into VS Code and add this image using the relative URL. Now, as I just mentioned, images.html is on the desktop, which is our current working directory. And the images folder is also inside that same current working directory, the desktop. So I'm first going to grab the folder by going images, and you'll see that the folder comes up here. And then I'm just going to add the dolphin image. Let's give it an alt text of a dolphin smiling. So let's check this out in the browser. So you can see now our second image is here. The first image is using an absolute URL, and the second image is using a relative URL, where the image is stored somewhere inside our current working directory. So in this chapter, we learned about image tags. The image tag is a self-closing tag with two attributes. The source attribute is a reference to the image file, and the alternative text attribute is a description of the image for the purpose of screen readers and SEO. We also revisited the concept of absolute and relative URLs that we have already summarized in the hyperlinks topic, but it's a really important concept, so I wanted to add it onto this summary card as well. An absolute URL is often used for an image externally hosted from our project, and a relative URL is used when the image lives inside our current working directory. In the Quill application, we will be saving our image files inside our project. So this is the method we will mainly be using. So let's go ahead and add images to the Quill homepage. In the features section, we have three sets of these, with heading, text, paragraph, and image. So we'll need to grab three different images. Now I know there are other images on the Quill homepage, like the logo and social media icons. But we're actually going to be using a different image type for those called an SVG, and we will cover that in the next chapter. Now the images I'm using are from this fantastic tool called Undraw. It has thousands of beautiful illustrations. All you do is click Browse Now and go to Search and look for the type of image you want. My images all contain a phone, so I'm going to type phone. And you see we get all these really nice illustrations. Now the really cool thing you can do is change the color of all of these. If I come to this color square here and click it, I can change the colors of all the images. On the Quill homepage, I'm using a hex color of this. Now don't worry about hex colors right now. We'll be talking about this a lot more in my CSS full course. The first features image is this one here. So I'll click on it and go download PNG. In my downloads folder, it will appear like this. I'm just going to rename it features 1. Now I've gone ahead and grabbed the other two images from Undraw in the correct colors. If you're coding along with me, I'm going to put these images in the description below so you can download the same images and add them to the project. I'm going to copy these images and put them inside the images folder in the Quill working directory. So I'm going to copy these, head over to my desktop, and I'm first going to remove some of these files that we've done in previous videos. It's getting a bit messy. So I'm going to select them and go move to bin. Inside the Quill folder, we have this images folder. So I'm going to paste in those 3 images. Let's now put them in our HTML document. In the features section, this here is feature 1, this here is feature 2, and this here is feature 3. So I'm going to pop the image below each paragraph element.